Welcome everybody to my lecture on cultural appropriation. Today we are attempting a video recorded lesson, and this is because Eric and I had decided that maybe our internet connections might be hindering our lessons, and so we thought to create something that would be a little bit more inclusive. So we're going to start without any ado because with this free version of screen recording, I only have 15 minutes. But yeah, let's get going. So today's lesson, as I've mentioned, is on cultural appropriation, and we're just going to run through. Hopefully you guys have watched your videos because the slides, I've kind of created the slides in response to the videos and some new slides as well. So we'll just start to get going with definitions of appropriation, and I've taken out some or the quote that the lady that was presenting in the video had mentioned, and she had mentioned a line or a statement made by Amandla Stenberg, who's a Hollywood actress, around black hair and the appropriation of black hair. The documentary is called "Don't Cash Crop on My Cornrows." So it says, the line between cultural appropriation and cultural exchanges, and in brackets, are always going to be bad. But here is the thing. Appropriation occurs when a style leads to racist generalizations or stereotypes where it originated, but is deemed as high fashion, cool or funny when the privileged take it for themselves. Appropriation occurs when the appropriator is not aware of the deep significance of the culture they are partaking in. She later on says, hip-hop stems from a black struggle. It stems from jazz and blues, styles of music which African Americans created to retain humanity in the face of adversity, which itself stems from songs used during slavery to communicate and survive. On a smaller scale, but in a similar vein, braids and cornrows are not merely stylistic. They are necessary in order to keep black hair neat. And so on your left hand side, you can see the item of rather the fashion item that was launched during a Gucci fashion show. And as the video had mentioned, this is the style that appropriated from the Brooklyn-born New York designer. Was it Harlem-born designer Dapper Dan. And then on your right hand side, we have an image of a recent fashion show by Comme des Garçons. But I'll just state what I've written about these two instances. On the left-hand side, Gucci appropriates from Dapper Dan after his store was closed down and almost 3 decades ago after his store was closed down almost 3 decades ago by the very same Gucci. This both speaks to Amanda's point about culture being created out of struggle, as Dapper Dan remodeled bags he purchased from Gucci to create garments that reflected the society he came from. At the same time, though, Dapper Dan misrepresents the brand's identity of Gucci, but somehow that is seen as okay based on the power dynamics at play. Gucci, a multi-million fashion conglomerate, and Dapper Dan, a rebellious startup. So it's very much clear that this is a David and Clive type of scenario. On the other hand, and another theorist who's written a lot around cultural migration and the like, Homie K. Baba talks and says, Homie Baba also mentions that appropriation, recontextualized differently, can be seen as strategies of resistance. This notion of scamming suggests that there are better ways of describing the repositioning of cultural icons or ideologies. To me, these processes of recontextualization can be positive, is what Baba says. They can be strategies of resistance. this can be contextualized to justify Dapper Dan's intentions. And so how I mentioned it was that because Dapper Dan is in a space where black fashion designers or black fashion or fashions that are prevalent within his society are not being reflected on the fashion ramps, this can be seen as a form of resistance. And also you have to kind of take into account the United States, or the political scene of the United States at the time, when you got to, and this is just after the Black Panther movement, and so black or African Americans in America are also looking to be recognized within America. But also it was the rise of hip hop, so there was a sense of this community around this music scene or cultural scene, because it did affect many other aspects, not just music. On the right hand side, I mentioned that much like Marc Jacobs, the instance on the right, we see an example of appropriation by Comme des Garçons, Homer Plus Autumn Winter 2021 by Ray Kwakuba, whom we discussed in the Silhouettes lecture or 2 weeks ago. Yeah. One would expect someone like a brand such as Comme des Garçons to be aware of cultural appropriation, being a Japanese brand. And so we are then left to speculate what the true intention of this was. And so, yeah, because she's a Japanese brand, these are the types of things that we've got to think about. In that, as I mentioned in the last lecture, you could see how Japanese brands had been appropriated into the European lens. And one thing that I want to also speak about in this particular image is interesting is that, yes, the braiding was taken and appropriated, but we know that in black culture as well, the idea of wig wearing has kind of has become the fashion or the mode of the time. And in a sense, it's an appropriation of white or Indian hair or Asian hair. And so we need to also ask ourselves, where does appropriation draw the line? Is it okay if it's only one color, or is it okay is it a matter of power dynamics that we're talking about? Yeah. And leading into the next slide, which is why this is so important, I want to read a quote from a panel discussion that Homi K. Baba was on, and they were discussing appropriation. If the same dance moves are learned through YouTube in Botswana, and then Bombay, and then somewhere else, that's a kind of infectious cultural representation. It's interesting that nobody makes the claim of appropriation until somebody feels that something inappropriate is happening. And it's only then, when someone has made the charge of appropriation, that a certain discussion begins. Appropriation need not only be across gender or color lines. Within the same gender, there can be class appropriations. There can be appropriations for all kinds of other forms of leverage. For example, the market has multiple aims: circulation, consumption, reification, profit competition, exploitation. But we must never forget how important the market is in creating intercultural power dynamics, how important it is in making certain objects appropriate and other inappropriate, certain objects visible and others invisible. The market has as much to do with that as the media does in its circulation of certain forms of representation, certain forms of life, acting, action, performance. So in other words, what I got from this quotation is that I think what is interesting in the first paragraph is the section where Baba suggests dishonesty by using the term inappropriate. Prior to this understanding is what he, for the purpose of this panel discussion, terms as a translation of cultural production, which he later describes as a convergence of multiple variables such as time, geographies, all made possible by modern technology. The influence of such variables as a result of their time and geography can naturally change and adapt the source of the prior influential cultural product, creating a new product altogether. So then, as he's mentioning, and as I write in there, that culture can emanate and be rebirthed as something, or reincarnated as something totally different based on your geography, where you met the culture, and maybe something like an a inter or a national joke can influence how another form of cultural production is translated. The most recent one, I think, is the one with the "Don't leave me, don't leave me." I don't know if you know that one, where it's like they put the tie on a black surface and they call it black tie, and then they say "Don't leave me," and that has traveled around the world and has changed as it has traveled around the world. So the last paragraph though speaks to the last paragraph refers to the market, which in a sense implicates those that consume the product, and those that consume would be us, the customer. Therefore, we cannot only blame the media for appropriating. These two instances make us understand that there are different types of appropriation, such as class appropriation and cultural appropriation, which we are studying today. And so, yeah, this was important in that we need to understand how we are appropriating, how we are visibly, or how our decisions, how our wants are influencing the magazines. Because at times the magazines are the ones that are just reflecting aspects that we may want, especially in fashion of today. And it's no longer this idea of we will show you what you don't know you want. But a lot of fashion today is creating garments that people know already, that are existing, and therefore there's definitely a market-led approach to creating new styles of the future. And so this next slide is just about how appropriation has been created, and this is from the film that you guys have been seeing, and you can see how the different forms of appropriation can be applied. Obviously, on the left hand side is an example of a Dinka man wearing this corset, and how that has been used in a Dior fashion show, and here a Dior campaign. And then on the right hand side, you have a Valentino who essentially look as though they're using Africa as a form of inspiration through the muted colors that find their way on the garments, and also the eclectic use of fabrics. There's also the hairstyle that the lady wears, and I would even go as far as suggesting the flat shoes. But you can see how appropriations of bodies have been used, and how Africans, in their own traditional sort of enactments and spiritual significance and religious and cultural significance, have been used as objects to display a sense of the exotic. Because obviously, as Africans, or as not as Africans, but as people who want fashion, we want things that are not of our immediate surroundings. We want to essentially we want that which is out there, as opposed to what we have in our backyard that nobody has. So this is just a diagram before we finish off this first 15-minute segment of how these elements of appropriation have played out. And I mentioned three main themes: aesthetic, political, and ethical, and some key words or key phrases that are associated with each element. So in terms of aesthetic, we're looking at the fear of erasure or misrepresentation, theft, or ownership, and these are the concerns of individuals who see it as from an aesthetic perspective. From a political perspective, there's elements of leverage of power, there's elements of entitlement, class representation, and these are murky areas for colonial or ex-colonial sort of relationships. And then there's elements of ethical, the intention, exoticization, objectification, and diversity, which I had mentioned in the previous screen. And we will go into that a little bit more to kind of discuss each theme. On to the next part.